Most people treat debt as a math problem. You borrow at a certain rate, you earn or invest at a higher rate, and as long as the spread is positive, the debt is working for you. This framework is taught in personal finance books, repeated by financial advisors, and accepted as settled wisdom by most people who consider themselves financially literate. Seneca would have called it one of the most dangerous lies in circulation. Not because the math is wrong, the math can be correct and the framework can still be catastrophically wrong, because debt is not primarily a math problem, it is a power problem. And once you understand exactly what Seneca meant by that, you will never look at a monthly payment the same way again. In his letters to Lucilius, Seneca returns to the subject of debt more consistently than almost any other financial topic. He writes about it in the context of wealthy Romans who borrowed to fund lifestyles they could have supported with their own resources. He writes about it in the context of politicians who borrowed to fund campaigns and then found their policy decisions quietly shaped by whoever held their notes. He writes about it in the context of people who died, leaving debts that consumed everything their families had built. In every case, his observation is the same. The person who owes money has transferred a portion of their future to someone else, and that transfer happens the moment the debt is signed, not the moment it becomes difficult to repay. This is the core of what the Stoics called the debt trap, and it has nothing to do with interest rates. Here is the exact mechanism. When you take on debt, you create an obligation that exists regardless of what happens to you. Your income can fall, your circumstances can change, an emergency can arrive, a better opportunity can appear that requires your capital. None of that changes the obligation. The payment is still due on the date it was agreed, whether the conditions that made the debt seem manageable are still in place or not. The debt is a fixed claim on your future self made by your past self, and your past self had no way of knowing what conditions your future self would be operating in. The moment you sign for the debt, you have made a binding agreement with a version of reality that no longer exists, the reality in which your current income continues, your current health holds, your current employer keeps valuing your role, your current relationship with your living costs stays stable. The debt locks in a version of your future before you've lived it. This is what Seneca means when he describes debt as a transfer of sovereignty, not in a dramatic sense, but in the precise mechanical sense that a portion of every paycheck you receive has already been committed before you receive it. A portion of every decision about your work and your location and your risk tolerance is constrained by the minimum income required to service the debt. A portion of every crisis you face is made harder by the fixed obligation running in the background regardless of what else is happening simultaneously. The person with no debt who loses their income has a problem with a manageable set of options: reduce spending, draw down savings, find new income sources, take temporary work below their usual level while rebuilding. Every option is available. The person with significant debt who loses their income has a crisis in which many of those options are partially or fully closed. They cannot draw down savings fast enough because the monthly obligations are large. They cannot take lower-paying temporary work because it doesn't cover the minimum payments. They cannot wait long enough for the right opportunity because the clock on the debt is running faster than the income can be replaced. The difference is not the income loss, it is the fixed obligation that continues while the income does not. Let's be honest about what modern debt culture has normalized, because Seneca's warning lands differently once you see the full picture of what most people are actually carrying. The average American household carries over $100,000 in total debt across mortgage, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. The credit card portion alone, which carries the highest interest rates of any mainstream debt product, averages over $6,000 per household and costs the typical balance carrier over $1,000 a year in interest before a single dollar of principal is reduced. Student loan debt in the United States now exceeds $1.7 trillion in total, carried by more than 43 million borrowers, and the average monthly student loan payment for borrowers in repayment is over $500, a fixed obligation that follows a person from their early 20s through their 30s and sometimes beyond, constraining every career decision and location decision and lifestyle decision during the years when financial foundations are being built and compounding is doing its most important work. Think about what that $500 a month actually represents over a decade. It is $60,000 that cannot be invested, cannot be saved, cannot be used as the seed capital for a business or an opportunity that would change the trajectory of everything that comes after. It is committed before the month begins, regardless of what the month requires, regardless of what opportunity the month presents. This is the invisible cost of debt that almost no conversation about borrowing includes in the calculation, not just the interest paid, but the compounding returns never earned on the capital that went to interest instead. None of this is presented to people as a trap when they sign it. It is presented as normal, as necessary, as the cost of doing business in a modern economy. The mortgage is the path to homeownership. The student loan is the investment in your future. The car loan is the practical solution to a transportation need. The credit card is the convenience that pays you back in points while you earn interest on your savings. Seneca would ask one question about it all. Who benefits from you believing that debt is normal?
The answer is not complicated. The financial system that sells these products benefits. The institutions that collect interest on $1.7 trillion in student loans benefit. The credit card companies that charge 20 to 29% annual interest on revolving balances benefit. The auto industry that sells cars most people couldn't afford without financing benefits. This is not a conspiracy. It is a business model, and the business model works because the product is designed to feel like a solution at the moment of purchase and function as a constraint for years afterward, extracting value from the borrower across the entire repayment period, rather than only at the point of sale. Seneca's warning is not that debt is always wrong. He is clear in his writing that some obligations are unavoidable and that the goal is not purity but clarity, knowing exactly what you have traded and for what, and never mistaking a constraint for freedom. His warning is specifically about voluntary debt taken on for lifestyle, appearance, or consumption, rather than for assets that generate returns independent of your continued labor. And his benchmark for whether a debt is acceptable or dangerous is the same question he applies to all externals in Stoic philosophy. If conditions change suddenly, does this obligation remain manageable, or does it become the thing that destroys everything else you have built? Apply that benchmark to most consumer debt, and the answer is obvious. A credit card balance at 24% annual interest is not manageable under most emergency conditions. A car loan on a vehicle that depreciates the moment it leaves the lot is not generating returns. A student loan on a degree that hasn't translated to income commensurate with the debt is not an investment in the financial sense of the word, whatever it may be in other senses. Here's where the Stoic framework goes further than most debt advice and into territory that most financial content won't touch directly. Debt doesn't just constrain your finances, it constrains your judgment about your finances. This is the subtler and more dangerous effect that Seneca identifies in his writing on obligation, and it operates in ways most people don't recognize because it happens gradually and invisibly over the full term of the debt. When you carry significant debt, you cannot afford to take financial risks that could reduce your income temporarily, even when those risks are genuinely good ones. You cannot leave a job that is underpaying you if leaving creates an income gap that makes the minimum payments unmanageable. You cannot turn down overtime or additional work, even when the additional work is damaging your health or your relationships, because the baseline income requirement is too high to allow it. You cannot invest opportunistically during market downturns, which is precisely when investment produces the highest long-term returns, because the cash that would fund the investment is already committed to debt service. You cannot take the contract role that pays more but lacks benefits, because the absence of employer-provided health insurance adds a cost that the debt service doesn't leave room for. Every one of these constraints means you are making financial decisions not based on what is actually the best option available to you, but based on what is compatible with keeping the debt serviced. The debt has effectively become the decision maker, and you have become the executor of its requirements. This is what Seneca means by sovereignty. The question is not whether you make the payment. The question is who is actually running your financial life. And if the honest answer to that question is that your loan servicer's requirements are setting the parameters within which you operate, the Stoics would say you are not financially free, regardless of what your income number looks like on paper. There is a specific Stoic test for this, and it is uncomfortably direct. Ask yourself, if you stopped making payments on all your debts tomorrow and simply accepted the consequences, what would the actual shape of your life look like in 1 year? Not what would happen financially, what would the shape of your actual life look like? Would you be doing the same work, living in the same place, making the same choices about your time and your energy? Most people find that their honest answer to this question reveals how much of their current life is being lived in service of past financial decisions rather than present values and present judgment. The job that isn't right is kept because the mortgage requires it. The city that isn't working is stayed in because moving would disrupt the income that services the loans. The career pivot that is clearly the right move is delayed indefinitely because the student loans require an income floor that the new path doesn't immediately provide. The relationship that has run its course is financially impossible to exit because two incomes are required to cover two sets of debt obligations that were taken on jointly. This is the trap, not the number, the shape of the life the number produces. Seneca's practical position on debt, drawn from his letters and his essay on the happy life, can be reduced to 3 principles that apply directly, regardless of what your current debt situation looks like. The first principle: never take on debt for consumption or appearance. This is the category of debt that Seneca writes about with the most contempt in his letters, the wealthy Romans who borrowed to fund banquets, clothing, and property improvements designed to impress people whose opinion they claimed not to care about. Borrowing to look like you have more than you have is the purest form of the trap, because the thing purchased exists only to create an impression, generates no return, and leaves behind only the obligation. If you cannot fund a lifestyle choice from current resources or current income, the Stoic position is that you cannot afford it, and borrowing to close the gap simply means living tomorrow's life today while paying for it with tomorrow's freedom.
The second principle: treat existing consumer debt as your primary financial emergency, not an inconvenience to be managed alongside other financial goals. This is where Seneca's framework diverges most sharply from conventional personal finance advice, which typically tells people to build savings, invest for retirement, and pay down debt simultaneously, allocating resources across all 3 at once. The Stoic position is that this strategy makes sense only once the high-cost debt is eliminated, because carrying 20 to 29% credit card debt while putting money into investments that historically return 7 to 10% annually is simply losing money at a slower rate. The math on this is not ambiguous. Every dollar of high-interest consumer debt you carry is costing you more than every dollar of investment you hold is likely earning, after tax, after fees, after the actual return you will receive rather than the historical average. The emergency is not that you aren't investing enough. The emergency is that you are paying a guaranteed 24% to hold a debt while earning a probable 8% on the investment meant to offset it. The third principle: build the gap between what you earn and what you need as wide as possible, and protect it with the same intensity Seneca applied to protecting his freedom of judgment. This gap, the difference between your income and your minimum required expenditures, is the actual measure of your financial sovereignty. Not your net worth, not your investment returns, not your income, the gap. A person earning $80,000 a year with $5,000 in required monthly obligations has less financial freedom than a person earning $45,000 a year with $1,200 in required monthly obligations. The higher earner has more money and less sovereignty. The lower earner has more genuine freedom over their financial decisions. And in the Stoic framework, freedom of financial decision is the only thing worth optimizing for, because it is the condition that makes every other financial advantage actually usable when you need it when the moment to use them actually arrives. Here's the question Seneca leaves you with, and it is the most useful question in all of his financial writing. How many months could you survive on what you currently own without earning anything and without borrowing anything? That number, whatever it is your actual financial independence. Not your salary, not your portfolio value, not your credit score. The number of months between you and zero if all income stopped tomorrow with no new obligations permitted. Call it your runway. Seneca's entire financial philosophy is aimed at making that runway as long as possible by keeping obligations as low as possible, because a long runway is what gives you the genuine freedom to make decisions based on what is right rather than what is required. Debt shortens the runway. Every dollar of monthly obligation reduces the number of months your existing resources can sustain you. Every reduction in monthly obligation extends it. The Stoic position is that extending the runway is the most valuable financial action available to most people, more valuable than optimizing investment returns, more valuable than increasing income.